What's up, everybody? This is Charlie Potter, senior team writer with BamaOnLine.com. Here with another BOL Basketball Show, and guys, we're previewing the Sweet 16. Alabama's still dancing in March Madness, and Blake's just back from Cleveland. Thankfully, he did this on a Monday night for all, unveiling the curtain a little bit after a long travel day. He did a great job covering the tide up in Cleveland for the first two rounds of the tournament, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But guys, Alabama going to the Sweet 16 for the third year in a row for the last five. It's almost become commonplace now in Tuscaloosa for Alabama to be at this point. So, Tim, when you look back at these two games, we'll start with the Robert Morris game. Alabama, a 90-81 winner in round one. That one was a little weird because I think we expected it to be a little bit different outcome. Mark Sears ends up with 22, leading Alabama. He had 19 in the second half, but Alabama was out-rebounded by two by the Colonials there at Robert Morris. Just what was your takeaways from that first game, and was it maybe a little different than you expected?
Yeah, I mean, those teams that come in, the excitement that Robert Morris had, they were deceptively athletic. They were unbelievably aggressive, and they let the referees let them play. I thought the game was refereed not how I like it, but I thought it was fair on each half. I thought Alabama got away. They were able to protect the rim aggressively. They were able to attack the rim aggressively. That worked against Alabama a few times with Jaron Stevenson. Obviously was a lot of contact on that, but I think the game that they called benefited Robert Morris. Not quite as beautiful of an offense, very aggressive, smart team. They did every little trick they had to do to be competitive. There wasn't a pick and roll without a hold. They grabbed every roller's jersey, and I don't blame them. I am passing no judgment. It's the same thing I do if they rolled Cliff on me. I'm pulling his pants down. You know what I mean? I'm doing what I can to stop it. But I think Alabama. I mean, they took a 1 point lead. I think Alabama trailed 6 seconds in that game and then kind of pushed out. But Robert Morris, I give him credit. They were better than most 15 seeds in my opinion, and they were extremely aggressive. And I think the refs let that game go a little bit. And of course, we had the Grant Baywatch moment. He almost ran out there like David Hasselhoff. Y'all might not remember that show, but when he hit that scores table, that was pretty exciting.
Yeah, I don't think that was something we anticipated. We knew going into the game that Grant Nelson was a game-time decision. He was kind of questionable for that matchup, dealing with that knee injury he suffered in the SEC tournament. And then, yeah, you mentioned it, that second half where Robert Morris took a lead. I think Grant Nelson looked at Nate Oates and was like, I'm ready to go in, and Nate didn't even hesitate. So we saw Grant play a pretty extensive minutes in this after that point and kind of wheeled Alabama back in the lead. They win by 9. Just, Blake, I know you were there. It sounds like it was a pretty Robert Morris heavy crowd up in Cleveland for that first round matchup.
Yeah, it was interesting. So Robert Morris is in Pennsylvania, so it was really close. And then kind of on top, like a close drive, the only Alabama fans there for the most part were like families of the players. So you had like the section behind the bench, but that was really it. There were a couple sprinkled here and there. Most of the building was Michigan State because they're right up the road, and they had a game, like their little pod was there as well. But then also something I found out was Dickerson, Robert Morris's best player, who had an amazing game. He played great. He's from Cleveland. So he had a lot of like hometown family there and friends there. And then on top of that, when you got a 15 seed playing at 2 and they start coming back and they kind of show that they're in the game, all the neutrals in the crowd kind of start favoring the underdog and cheering really hard for it. Like there were some moments down there in the mid second half when Robert Morris came back and then briefly took the lead. Like it felt like a true road game in there for Alabama, which can be difficult. I remember they faced a similar thing in Spokane last year with Grand Canyon when they brought a bunch of fans and Robert Morris fans. Yeah, right. they probably outnumbered Alabama fans 2-1, like in terms of raw number there, which was pretty impressive for a 15 seed. But it was nice for them given that it was so close. But as far as the game goes, it was incredibly physical. And like I got to sit courtside, so I got to kind of see it up close. And like, yeah, people were getting grabbed every single possession. They were letting a lot go, which kind of favors the underdog in that situation. It kind of helps the 15 seed out a little bit when they're allowed a little more contact, levels the playing field a bit. In the locker room after the game, I was talking to Mark Sears, and he had 2 or 3 new cuts on his face, like open wounds from how physical the game was. So it was a tough game. It was one where Alabama's toughness got tested. They got out rebounded by 2, which isn't something you expect. We talked after the Florida game a couple weeks ago that they've only been out rebounded a couple times this entire year, and one of them was in this Robert Morris game. And then the Grant Nelson thing, like that was huge for him to feel ready enough to go to tell Nate Oates to put him in. I'm sure they would have rather rested him the entire game and not had to use him, but it says a lot, I think, about Grant Nelson and his mentality to want to be the guy that says, hey, coach, put me in, I'm ready to go. And he really did kind of juice up the team. Like there was more of a sense of urgency when the guys looked at the table and they said, Grant's not ready to play his last game yet. Maybe we should play up to that standard, And so I thought they played harder once Nelson went in the game. They out-rebounded them over the last stretch after Nelson went in the game. Mo Diabate had 7 rebounds in 8 minutes or something like that. So they kind of turned it on and had more sense of urgency once he went in, and he looked healthy, which was good. But it was a tough game, and that's kind of how the NCAA tournament goes. Sometimes you're going to have tough games, and the important thing is to survive and win the game so that you can move on.
Charlie, going back to Mark's injuries, might have been those after the shot plays. There was a lot of contact after the shot. Elbows. I saw Mark fly into the goalpost. We saw that a lot. They didn't call any contact after a block. I mean, one time Mark was just slung along the baseline. They let that go pretty consistently. Mark did a good job of getting in there, so he probably did catch a few elbows, a few nicks.
I didn't really recognize any of the names from an official standpoint. I know Blake and I always love to share that to rile some people up before the game because that'll do it more than anything. I didn't recognize really many of those guys. So that was maybe the difference there. It's also funny to hear Blake mention Dickerson and how he learned that he's from Cleveland. It's funny to see how at the game, you don't really get like the TV broadcast because if you watched it on
I'm
TV,
sure they said that a billion times.
You knew from tip-off, and they were sure to remind you. So that was definitely just funny to kind of hear the differences there. And then now Alabama moved on to the round of 32 and faced the St. Mary's team the story going into that one was just the difference in tempo. Alabama was first in the nation when you look at KenPom, and I think St. Mary's is right now still 360th. Quite the gap there, just in terms of the tempo these teams like to play with. But Alabama comes out a winner, 80-66. Is the first time the Gales have given up 80 or more points in over 100 games. I think that's really impressive, just the way that they kind of hang their hat on defense. And Alabama did it in a variety of ways. You had 6 guys in double figures. We saw big contributions from a lot of guys. I thought Cliff was really good in this game. Alabama was actually able to kind of respond from a rebounding standpoint and really flexed its depth against a team like St. Mary's. So when you look at this win in the second round, Tim, what kind of jumps out to you?
I think you got to talk about Mo D coming out 4 for 4 in these two games from three-point land, and also Reed coming in there and giving some important minutes. Those little small things that matter. I thought Mark was good. I'm not sure why there's criticism of Mark Sears other than I think the bar is set so high with him being a friend. We've talked about it ourselves. The bar is set with him so high. He's not shooting the 3 well. But you know what he's doing in both games? He's getting in the lane. He's facilitating. There's a lot of those alley-oops are coming from Mark. He's getting to the free throw line. He's knocking down his free throws. I don't know why the 3's not there other than I went back and watched all his shots. He's not getting the clean looks that some of the other guys are. Aiden's, set his feet. He's a elbow in kind of guy. Chris Youngblood's the same way. He shoots. I'm not even sure his shoes are on. Both his shoes are on sometimes. When he's shooting it. So, but I thought Mark, that was a big part. But you're right. I think it was even across the board. The fear of St. Mary's. And I saved all my friends' tweets. The fear of them was amazing. I don't believe my friends are watching St. Mary's. I'm going to be honest with you. I think they're reliving the 90s when a team like St. Mary's, like Gonzaga. I spent 15 years there going, they're mid-major. I'm like, their basketball has not been major. They're at the top of the game. But the fear of St. Mary's was interesting. But I think it was just a big mismatch for me. They were going to have trouble scoring, and Alabama was going to be able to score.
Yeah, I think with Mark, I think what people look at is he's 1 for 9 from 3. And that's usually not what you're used to seeing from a Mark Sears. But you're right. I think he has, in the 2 tournament games, 13 assists and 4 turnovers. He's getting it done and taking care of the ball. Blake, you wrote about this after the game, and it kind of ties into what we were talking about in the last game, but also in this most recent game, is that Alabama kind of felt a little disrespected going into this one. People calling them soft, or maybe not really flat out soft, but saying they're more of a finesse team. And I think a lot of those guys took it to heart.
Well, no, apparently. So before I found this out in the locker room after the game, that before the game, Alabama's staff put together a video, like a 1 to 2 minute video of like national analysts and commentators, like basically calling them soft. And they said a couple times, like analysts were using the word soft and saying that this is a soft team and that this team is going to struggle. They showed a couple people picking St. Mary's for them to win. And so the more I kind of found out about this video, it was the last thing that they showed right before they ran out, the last time out of the locker room for the game. And they kind of looked around, and it didn't really fire them up. But somebody I talked to said they all kind of looked around and just like nodded and knew that like they needed to go prove them wrong. And that's exactly what they did. Like the effort that they had on the glass specifically, like we knew going into this game, the rebounding was the key to all of it, because rebounding defensively means that you can push and transition better and kind of enforce your tempo as opposed to St. Mary's. But then also St. Mary's is the number 2 offensive rebounding team in the country. So that's where they get a lot of their production. So that also limits them on the offensive side. It was the key to both sides of the floor for Alabama was rebounding. And there was a ton of effort. I don't know if it was just because I was sitting close to the court, but that was the most effort I'd seen from all of them collectively as a unit on the glass all season. And St. Mary's, like, they have some big guys. Like, they have a 6'10" dude that's 250. They have 2 7-footers. Even their 6'9", 6'8" guys that they play down low are still, like, bulky and strong. Like, they have a lot of really big dudes who can bruise you underneath. And Cliff, Grant, Jaron, Mo, Aiden Sherrill, like, even the guards, LeBaron had 6 rebounds, I think. Like, they all went up with intention and purpose and grabbing rebounds higher off the ground than I've seen them do it all season. And, throwing elbows and boxing out and doing everything they needed to do effort wise. And they proved that they were the tougher team, and St. Mary's is a tough team, but they wanted to go out and make that statement as far as toughness goes. And they did it, and they showed it throughout all 40 minutes last night.
I kind of wanted to go back to something that Tim brought up, and it's just kind of your biggest surprise from the first weekend. This is Alabama specific. For me, it's Mo D, because he's 4 for 4 to start this tournament from 3-point range. And he's done a lot of the things we've seen Mo D do throughout his career, and especially this season. He's making those blue-collar plays, but just the way that he's knocking down shots from the 3-point line has been kind of an added dimension for this team. I think you could go a lot of different directions here. Cliff has been really strong these 2 games. I think what Grant was able to do, kind of providing juice against Robert Morris can be one. But for you, Tim, where do you go? Is it Mo D or is it somebody else?
I think it's Mo D, but also it's small things like LeBaron having 2 blocks and 4 steals and 2 things. I mean, it's the small things when you love the game that you notice it kind of separates them. That tells you there's effort. One of LeBaron's blocks was amazing. I mean, it was a full throttle volleyball spike. Hey, dude, he looked around like, did y'all see that? That's how good it was. So I think it's a small thing. Mo D being 4 for 4 is just, to me, that's just hard to touch because it's Mo D. It's a nice shot. I don't know if any hit the rim. But I will say Reed coming up clutch in the first game. Aiden's showing up one. It's a little bit of everything here with this team, which is kind of what you expect, with this team kind of put together and kind of piecemealing every game together for who will be the hero and who's going to play the best.
Yeah, it's a little different than last year because it was the Mo D game against Grand Canyon. We saw Grant have a big game against North Carolina. We saw Jaron step up big against Clemson. I don't know if they win those games without those performances, but it's been kind of across the board, especially in the last game. But what about you, Blake? Do you have a thing that surprised you more than anything in these first 2 games?
Yeah, there's so many, I feel like there's so many different ways you could go with this because, the team they're playing a little differently than they played in the regular season with, Mark's not shooting the ball necessarily nowhere near as well as we're used to seeing him. So a lot of guys are stepping up, which is leading to a lot of kind of different things. I think it's crazy that they've just turned into Lob City the past 2 games. And, they threw, I think, 7 or 8 against Robert Morris.
Cliff's
and
behind his back.
Yeah, Cliff throwing down a reverse.
Are you kidding me? One time
It's
Cliff
unbelievable.
took one from Jaron. One time Cliff took one from Jaron.
Yeah, he did. In transit. That was right in front of me too. And I saw Jaron running right in front of me. So I thought, that's who it was. And then Cliff came out of nowhere, not even in like my frame of vision, and he was able to throw one down. I think it shows a lot of trust that these guys have too. That's big with Cliff finding his role, because there were times this season where he struggled a lot offensively, and it wasn't necessarily that he struggled; it was that Alabama and Oates in this offense struggled to figure out how to use him. And now he's comfortable in this high screen and roll lob, and the guards, like, they've seen him throw it down enough times. They're like, just get it up there. Like, he's going to go get it. Grant's doing the same thing. He's thrown down 2 or 3. So I think that adds another dimension of this offense that makes it even harder to stop. Like, last year's offense was kind of at its best when you had Pringle as a lob threat coming off that high ball screen. And then when they cover that and they're emphasizing that defensively, that leaves spray outs for threes. So that kind of opens up a lot as far as your offense goes, and it makes transition really fun. But also just kind of overall, I think it's great to see that while Sears isn't shooting the ball the best, you're still seeing everybody else step up and play really good basketball. Like, outside of Sears' three-point shot, I think everybody else is playing really well right now and playing some of the best that they've played all season. It's great that Grant looks really healthy. Like, Grant has played really good basketball really since he got going in that Auburn game. He played really well against he in Florida before he got hurt. Maybe there's some worry that coming off the injury, he wouldn't be as effective, but he looks great kind of on both ends of the floor. They looked really locked in defensively against St. Mary's. So there, as far as surprises, there's a lot of different ways you can go because they're doing a lot of things really well. And it's good, too, that they're not just being solely Sears reliant and that he's going for 30 every game and that no one else is playing well. Like, you're getting really good team basketball across the board, and I think that bodes well for the future.
It does kind of feel like Sears, it's just kind of a matter of when and not if for him, for those shots to fall to. It feels like he's due for a big game. I know he had the stretch where he was 5 games in a row. He's averaging damn near 30 points a game, but it just hasn't felt like he's been quite himself from an offensive standpoint. Yeah, like with Cliff, I think I tweeted it out and put it in the story on BOL after the game. In these 2 games, I think he's missed 2 shots. He has 1 turnover, and he hasn't committed a foul in either game. Just clean basketball from Cliff.
And I think those 2 shots were in the same possession, too.
They were, yeah. Before that, I think he was 13 for 13. So
it was so much the announcers were like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa!"
Yeah, what's happening?
Whoa, twice! Yeah. They were like all excited.
It's crazy because when you look at just Mo D and Cliff in these first 2 games, 55 points, 30 rebounds combined. Just
that's crazy.
It's nuts, and I think they've been big reasons why Alabama's going to the Sweet 16. Blake and I are going to be in Newark this weekend to watch Alabama take on BYU. The winner gets either Duke or Arizona. We won't really spend too much time on that because we don't know what's going to happen there. I think I speak for this whole group of saying that we want to see an Alabama-Duke matchup for a chance to go to the Final Four. I think that's pretty much the consensus across the board. But looking ahead to this matchup with BYU, it's Thursday, March 27th. It's a 6:09 p.m. Central Time tip-off on CBS. The Cougars are coming into the game beating VCU in the first round and then upsetting Wisconsin in the second round. I don't know if you can really call that necessarily an upset because BYU's really good. I think it's a pretty evenly matched game. We saw that on the court. But it's a similar style of play as Alabama. They like to score the ball and score it in bunches. So when you look at this matchup, Tim, what sticks out to you and how excited are you to see Alabama in the Sweet 16 again?
Yeah, I mean, you got to say that once you're here, any of the other 15 teams can beat you. I mean, this is basketball at its finest because that, any given night with basketball, you can get beat, but especially at this level when teams get hot. I like the matchup for Alabama because I think them playing loose and shooting and scoring is what they do best. I look at BYU a little bit like Kentucky, not as good defensively, not as good athletically. We see what Kentucky, Arkansas has done. You put those teams with talent together. I think that's kind of the matchup. I mean, it's going to be a high-scoring game. It's really going to be a lot of fun considering the last 3 Alabama games haven't been like really, beautiful to watch. It's not like, hey, this is the beautiful game. You got a lot of slowing it down and grabbing and headbutting and, losing the game. But I like the matchup. I mean, this is what you're for. I mean, there's no – everybody scares you, and there's no ducking the smoke. You're in the Sweet 16. You know what I mean? There's no easy path for anybody. I mean, I think every seed's a top 6 seed at this stage. Well, Arkansas is a 10 seed, but they're not they're not normal. They're
They're
just a
talented.
Tennessee.
Yeah.
They underachieved and they got healthy. So that's it. But I'd like the matchup for Alabama to get to that next round. I mean, this is what you want. It's kind of the pace you want to play. And I mean, if you lose at your own game, you just lose. Everybody with one team is going to lose in this bad boy anyways.
What about you, Blake? What sticks out to you, or what stuck out to you when you saw BYU on that matchup line in the Sweet 16?
I mean, BYU's really good. They're playing like I think analytically they're a top 10 team since the start of February. So that kind of tells you the kind of basketball that they're playing right now. And I picked them to get to the Sweet 16. I picked them to beat Wisconsin. So this was kind of the matchup that I expected to see for Alabama. But I think it's really interesting. It shouldn't be too hard for Alabama to prepare for because BYU is very similar and they have a very high-powered offensive style of basketball, but also they're kind of what people think Alabama is in terms of they kind of do live and die by the three. Like they shoot 38% from three as a team, which is really good. They're undefeated when they shoot 38% or better, and they're about 500 or worse when they shoot lower than that. And so like they really do rely heavily on making a lot of threes. A lot of that is because of their front court, which is very undersized. I think their starting center is 6'9", and their starting four-man is 6'8". So advantage Alabama as far as size and rebounding should go in this game. And with the way that Cliff Amore and Grant Nelson are playing right now, I think that plays into Alabama's favor a lot to be able to kind of lean on those two guys and be able to dominate the glass. If they're able to do that, they should be in pretty good shape. And the way that BYU shoots the ball, it's going to be tough. Like you've got to have good contests. They have to be locked in defensively. If they play defense the same way they did against St. Mary's with that same level of urgency, execution, communication, all of that, if they carry that over, they'll also be in a good spot, kind of like we saw last year when they kind of turned it up defensively at the right time going into March. And then on the offensive end, I think this is a perfect opportunity to get Mark Sears going because BYU defensively is not as good as Alabama is this year. They're really analytically close to where Alabama was a year ago. They're around the 70s in defensive efficiency, and I think in the actual number, their points per 100 possession number, it's over 100. It's like 101 or something like that. So it's around where Alabama was hovering in the tournament or before the tournament last year. So Alabama's going to get clean looks in this game, and they should be able to score and kind of get what they want on the offensive end. A lot of it's going to come down to how they defend. And if last game was any indication as far as defending and rebounding goes, I like their chances.
When you look at this matchup, you're right. I mean, BYU is a good shooting team. I think they lead the Big 12 in field goal percentage and three-pointers made. But, I mean, when you're watching the game, Richie Saunders is a name to know. He's averaging nearly 16 and a half. In the last game against Wisconsin, he scored 25 to help the Cougars advance to the second weekend. So it should be a fun matchup. And it's going to be different, again, like we talked about, than the first two. And before we kind of move on to the last topic, Blake, we kind of add this in to the show before you joined, but I think you'll have plenty to talk about. I've seen your tweets since. But what have you thought of the tournament overall so far, and what do you think about it from an SEC standpoint? Because I know after the first round, a lot of talk was made because the SEC got 14 teams in. But right now you look at the Sweet 16, the second weekend, damn near half the field's the SEC. They have 7 teams advancing to the second weekend. So, Tim, I'll start with you because this was your idea. Just what do you think of the tournament overall, and what do you think of the way the SEC's kind of handled things?
I love it. I mean, there's been brilliant play. I mean, there's been controversy. There's been storylines. We had Rick Pitino sitting in the stands watching his son coach. You know what I mean? You got stuff like that. You got upsets. You see John Calipari versus Pitino. I mean, it's everything you want to be. With SEC, I think it's ridiculous. I mean, they kick ass. I mean, that's what they did this year. They challenged themselves. They kicked ass. SEC's not off to a slow start at 0-1. There's 14 teams. We knew 14 teams weren't going to the Sweet 16. We already knew that. But I think when you look, I mean, if my math is right, and it's probably not, but the start of the 64 the SEC had 20%. In the round of 23, the round of 32, they had 25% roughly. So whatever 7 out of 16 is, that's their percentage right now. They're more than holding their own. Charlie's trying to think what it is, but He probably knows it. But I mean, they've more than held their own. I love it. I mean, I'll never have any complaints about this. I find it interesting that the whole NIL is running basketball. We don't really see that discussion. We see it for football from game one. We got guys in the portal right now. We have coaches in tournaments going to other teams, and we have people. I think I read 710 players hit the portal today, and we're
Yep.
in still have 16 teams left still playing. So to me, I just find. I mean, I think it's beautiful. I love it. I mean, look at Blake's face.
Yeah, I
Hello,
know.
I'm
Yeah,
tired.
he's
Getting tired.
exhausted. He's like
Sunburned for being
Man,
in
I've
yeah,
Cleveland. It
driven
looks like
12 hours today.
he
he's
Like,
a
gets
kid.
sunburned in the gym in Cleveland. Only
I'll say
Blake.
this though, you mentioned the NIL thing. There's been a lot of talk about how NIL has ruined this year's tournament just because there are no
ask me about it.
Cinderellas.
Let me
I'm
talk
going
about
to. That's why I'm listen. You know how I roll. I like to serve up the underhead softball pitch, but it's people are saying that NIL and things like that have ruined the tournament because there's no Cinderellas in the Sweet 16. There's less parity. You have the haves advancing, the have-nots are not.
Yeah.
So the talk is out there, and I could tell that, and maybe even the SEC talk is pissed Blake off a little bit.
No, listen. So I think the notion that like the tournament's ruined or that college basketball is like in trouble because like Cinderellas didn't really make it that far this year, I think is just like an insane overreaction to one tournament where we knew the top of the sport was really dang good this year. Like
Yep.
you can look at analytics and see that teams' net ratings are higher this year than they've ever been, and that kind of across the board, the entire top 10 this year could fit into the top 2 years ago. Like that's how good teams are at the top of the sport this year. So I'm not surprised that none of the 1, 2, 3, or 4 seeds lost in the first 2 rounds. Like that's not shocking at all. But I do think like this also isn't the first year that basketball's had NIL. It's not the first year that basketball's had the transfer portal. So I don't think that magically the portal and NIL have caused in 1 year an insane divide of this magnitude. I think part of it is the COVID year that people are still like look across the board. All the best teams in the country have 23 and 24, sometimes 25-year-olds. Like I think that's causing more of a disparity than NIL in the portal is right now, because we had NIL in the portal when FDU beat Purdue. We had NIL in the portal when Florida Atlantic and San Diego State went to the Final Four 2 years ago. We had NIL in the portal whenever St. Peter's went to the Elite Eight 3 years ago. Like there have been tons of stories and March Madness moments and underdogs and Cinderellas that have happened during this NIL and portal era. So I still think it's an overreaction. It's premature to see one tournament where a bunch of really good favored teams make it to the Sweet 16 and think that it's never going to happen again. Also, if they call a travel on Derek Queen in the Maryland game, then you have a 12 seed in the Sweet 16, and nobody's talking about this. Colorado State arguably should be here if they called a travel on Derek Queen and he didn't get that shot off. So it's just too much. Like the whole talk of all of the overreaction to the tournament is too much for me. Also, the SEC, they're really dominant. They've been good all this doesn't surprise me either. Like there's 7 of 16 left, and we knew they were this good because before they got into conference play, they lost like collectively 20 games. Like the SEC beat up on everybody in the non-conference, and then they went and had to play each other, so they lost a bunch of games, and now they're playing teams in the non-conference again and winning a lot. Like that doesn't shock me either because we saw them against non-SEC teams early in the season, and they dominated then. And now they're going far in the tournament now.
Hey, I got a thought.
Rant done. I'm done now.
What if Derek Queen had hit that shot against UConn?
I don't want to know.
With Danny Hurley,
he might have said those words on the court.
Would Danny Hurley have a bond? I know the question is how much would his bond be? He would lose. Danny Hurley would lose his mind on that. And it did look 3 steps to me. Did y'all get a good look at it? I mean,
yeah.
I hate to say to call it, but it is 3 steps.
Could you imagine if they do call that though?
That's the other thing. It's like, what if they do call it?
It's kind of like that Auburn. That year Auburn got the foul late. In the Final Four. I will say that the 3 steps actually might have made the shot harder. He was going in the complete opposite direction. So I just thought that I agree with everything Blake said. The SEC's not fake. So everybody can hold on to hold on to their tweets till next week.
Always good counseling there. We'll get out of here on this. We mentioned the transfer portal. It opened up officially on Monday, and there's a player. I know Tim has mentioned this on the BO Roundtable that's kind of been linked to Alabama so far. Joson Sannon, the guard from Arizona State. He's a former top 30 overall player, a guy that averaged, what I write down, nearly 12 points a game this season. He's expected to enter the portal, and Alabama's expected to be in on him. Just, Tim, what have you gathered? Is there any new information or kind of give people what they want to know about this potential portal target?
The games were still going on when I got a text saying this is a guy to watch. And then I did a look, and Alabama's playing. So, I mean, there's, limited. So by the time I made that post, I definitely trusted my source that Alabama would be a factor there. And again, not saying it's a done deal, but
Right.
Alabama was going to be a factor. I had 3 or 4 separate sources that don't know each other talking to me within an hour. But the most interesting one, which I actually dug up myself, was that Preston Murphy had coached him in AAU basketball. So
There you go.
obviously Preston Murphy has, he's got mafia connections. You know what I mean? He knows somebody in every Preston Murphy just has he's got those octopus arms everywhere. He knows and has connections. So having him there, I mean, a guy that would fit the mold for an Alabama guy, young guy, film very, I don't know if he hit the net on some of the film I watched. A straight shooter, athletic with some good size. And Alabama's losing some guys in the backcourt, obviously. I mean, you're still wondering about Trelly and Houston, both coming off red shirts. But, I mean, you're obviously going to lose, Chris and Mark and some other guys there. So, Alabama, the one thing that I will say, Alabama's going to be very popular name in the portal. Showing interest means nothing. We deal with this in football. Alabama and every college coaching staff worth their salt is checking and kicking the tires with everybody, calling
Yep.
and saying what's the story isn't the same as what we consider interest, as in, hey, if you hit the portal, come on. But I haven't seen him officially hit the portal. We thought it might be this morning, but don't forget they have 48 hours to actually put him in the portal. The school does. So obviously it was announced. He himself let it be known that he was going to be entering. So expect Alabama to be pretty active there.
Yeah, that's definitely something to keep an eye on. And you mentioned Preston Murphy. Nate Oates talked about it on Hey Coach on Monday night, how he's trying to focus on BYU, but because the portal is open, he's got Preston spending some time recruiting. He said, quote, because I don't think the league's getting any worse, and he's not wrong. The SEC looks like it's here to stay. And Blake, I wanted to kind of turn it over to you to close things out, not just about Sannon specifically, but when you look at Alabama from a portal need standpoint, obviously we look at guard because Tim highlighted Mark Sears, Chris Youngblood are going to be leaving. There's expectations that Baron Philon's a guy that could be one and done going to the NBA. But what are some other positions you think Alabama can maybe target here via the transfer portal to add to their roster for next season?
Yeah, I think you could always use wings that can shoot. I mean, that's kind of the number one archetype go-to that you want for Nate Oates. He wants long, rangy, athletic guys that can defend and shoot 3-and-D guys. I think this team's probably going to need a point guard of sorts in the portal, kind of depending on what LeBaron Philon does. He's got an NBA decision coming up that could greatly affect what Alabama does with this roster. Because really, outside of him, your only true ball handler coming back is Aiden Holloway. And so he's good, but you need more than one point guard on your team if Philon does choose to go pro, which is very up in the air. We don't know for sure what he's going to do on that. And then they're going to need a center at some point because Cliff's gone, Grant Nelson's gone. Those are two guys that have played the 5 for you. You bring Aiden Sherrill back as a sophomore. I think he's a really good option who's going to get better and has a ton of potential. But also you need more than just one 6'11" 5-man. Like you're going to need a center. So really any position, like they're going to need depth. I know also at some point pretty soon the house settlement should pass and they'll be up to 15 scholarships. I'm kind of interested. I might ask Nate Oates about that at some point in the next couple availabilities just to see if they're operating as if they're going to have 15 scholarships available or if they're still operating as if it's 13, because that kind of changes who you recruit and how you recruit and things like that. But, they could get somebody at most positions, but those 3 in particular are definitely going to be some needs.
Well, Blake, get some rest. We got another long travel day on Tuesday. We'll probably be in the air when people are listening to this. But if you haven't, give us a like and subscribe to the channel. We appreciate it. If you're listening via podcast, a 5-star rating and review is greatly appreciated as well. And hopefully we're talking to you guys next week and previewing another Final Four run. So until then, we'll see you guys on the next show.